So I just saw the latest Makoto Shinkai film, Suzume, or Suzume no Tojimari as the Gigachads like to call it, and as expected, it was fucking awesome. Now for anyone who has been a long-time subscriber to my channel, know that Shinkai is very much a director I adore and connect with, as not only one of the first ever videos I made on this channel was about Makoto Shinkai, but I also go in depth about two of his most popular films on my podcast, Far Off Films. Your Name and Weathering with You are legitimately some of my favorite movies ever, and all the qualities that make those movies great are certainly in Suzume, but what I love about his newest film is just how different this film feels compared to his previous directorial efforts. You see, one thing that sets this film apart from his previous movies is that this is not a tragic high school love story like Your Name or Weathering with You are. This is a film that, while having elements of love in it, very much prioritizes being a road trip fantasy adventure more than anything. You see, the basic premise is that it follows a young 17-year-old girl named Suzume who one day encounters this really hot, howl-looking hunk named Sota, whose job is to close doors before a giant ghost poop comes down and causes earthquakes. But one of these jobs goes wrong when he gets turned into a chair by a cat, leading to this sort of race against time, stopping the apocalypse while also saving the people that Suzume loved most. It's basically Knock at the Cabin if it wasn't made by a shitty director. In premise, you're probably thinking, wow, this sounds very different from the type of films that Shinkai normally tells. And while this is partly true, as I mentioned before, this film does not focus on any teenage romance, this still has all the Shinkai elements that I've come to expect and adore. For starters, and let's get the obvious shit out of the way, this movie is just drop-dead gorgeous, and while this is sort of expected as Shinkai has always managed to make his movies look really beautiful, he outdid himself with this film as there were so many moments where my mouth legitimately dropped because of how insane the visuals were. I don't know what sort of crack Shinkai has been selling or what sort of deal he made with the devil to get his movies to look this goddamn amazing, but it was seriously well worth it because I just can't stress enough just how incredible this movie looks. There were a couple of moments where Shinkai integrates 3D animation that were a bit off-putting at first, but as the film went on, I sort of got used to it. I know that modern anime has been trying to integrate 3D animation more and more into their traditional 2D projects, and while I'm never opposed to this idea, it tends to get distracting, and the same applied to this movie as well. But the visuals are things we all expect from Shinkai at this point. What about the characters, the story, the other stuff that really matters? Well, for me, I thought they worked incredibly well. I really loved the character of Suzume. Her motivations were a bit unclear at first in terms of why she was so psyched to do all this magic shit with Sota, but without spoiling anything, as the film goes on, when we learn more about her past, the trauma and horrors that she experienced when she was a young girl, and how all that culminates in the decisions she ultimately makes, was not only fascinating to watch, but got me more interested and engaged with their journey as the film went on. In the same vein as Taki and Mitsuo from Your Name, and Hosaka and Hina from Weathering with You, Suzume, and to an extent Sota, are characters that are sort of thrust upon you, but as you spend more time with them and learn about why they are and who they are, you start to become invested and interested, and by the time the final climax happens, you just sit there wondering how everything's gonna pan out, and I just truly, really enjoyed these characters. And speaking of the same vein, like his previous other movies, this is a film that also has a big environmental theme with a particular emphasis on earthquakes. According to Shinkai, the 2011 earthquake and tsunami that hit Japan served as a major influence when writing the story, as well as the current phenomenon of the country experiencing a declining birth rate and aging population, leading to a lot of areas in Japan feeling abandoned and lost. And these influences really help elevate what's happening in the movie, because when incorporating these real-life elements that affected Japan, you get this sense of authenticity and realism from the film, which I know is weird to say about a movie that incorporates fantasy magic shit, but this is what I really love about Shinkai as a director. He manages to take these inherently whimsical and fantastical concepts and then grounds them in a way that makes his characters and stories feel more real and relatable, and it's certainly no different with Suzume. I loved pretty much everything that this film has to offer. However, while there are obvious similarities and parallels to his previous films, in a way you could argue that this feels the least like a Makoto Shinkai film, especially in terms of its narrative, because as I mentioned before, this movie ditches the sort of teenage love story romance in favor of a more road trip fantasy adventure, and at times the film almost felt kind of like a Ghibli movie, and apparently this is very much an intentional choice, as Shinkai has stated Kiki's Delivery Service as a cinematic influence. But as I was watching the film, whether this was intentional or not, there were a lot of moments that reminded me of other Miyazaki flicks like Spirited Away and Nausicaa Valley of the Wind. It seems that Shinkai wanted to make something that was similar enough to his previous ventures while also trying to do its own thing, and I think for the most part it succeeded. While the Miyazaki-like elements of the film were obvious, they never felt distracting or annoying because it helped complement the story that Shinkai was telling, and the result is something truly extraordinary. I do have a couple of issues with the movie though. As I mentioned, the 3D CG kind of got irritating, and while I did get used to it, it was still a sort of distraction. Additionally, the movie overstayed its welcome a little bit. I mean, the film is 2 hours and 2 minutes long, and while I pretty much enjoyed everything I was watching, in retrospect the movie didn't need to be that long. There was one section in the second act involving a bar I felt like could have been cut, as it was more or less repeating the same information I had already received, and would have helped pick up the pace pace a little bit, but overall though, these are incredibly minor issues that in no way ruin the film. This is very much a film where its positives outweigh the negatives, and the end result is yet another Shinkai masterpiece. While I still think Your Name and Weathering With You are the better movies, Suzume is easily one of the best films of 2023, and as of recording is my second favorite film of 2023, and I'm giving Suzume an 8 out of 10. Thank you and goodbye.